The courtroom buzzed with low murmurs as a tall man in a crisp gray suit stood quietly beside his attorney. His name was Daniel Cross, composed, confident, and completely silent as officers near the back snickered under their breath. "He looks nervous," one deputy whispered to another. "Probably another guy trying to play smart in front of the judge." Daniel heard them. Everyone within 20 feet did. The mockery wasn't hidden, it was casual, cruel, and assumptive. They thought they knew who he was, just another face, just another file. Even the judge glanced at Daniel with vague disinterest, as if he didn't quite belong in the upper tier of justice being practiced here. But Daniel didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He simply turned to his attorney, whispered a few words, and waited for the moment that would turn the entire courtroom upside down. Because Daniel Cross wasn't just any defendant. He wasn't even supposed to be on trial. He was there for something far bigger, and the real case hadn't even begun yet. The prosecutor, a smug mid-level attorney named Harold Denton, strolled toward the bench with the energy of someone who thought today's case was already won. "Your Honor," he began, "we're dealing with a gentleman who, according to our records, refused to comply with officers during a traffic stop. He was uncooperative, refused to provide ID, and delayed the process by demanding a supervisor. Classic behavior of someone trying to act bigger than he is." Laughter rippled again from the back of the room. Two of the officers chuckled out loud, one of them muttering, "Bet he Googled how to talk to cops the night before." Daniel didn't move. His eyes remained fixed on the prosecutor like he was watching a child trying to play chess against a grandmaster. The judge, half listening, sighed. "Is that accurate, Mr. Cross? Were you combative?" Daniel finally spoke. Calm. Measured. Sharp. "I asked for a supervisor because the two officers were operating outside protocol. I cited case law. They ignored it." Denton smirked. "You're not a lawyer, Mr. Cross." Daniel tilted his head. "I'm aware." Then came the pause. "I run the bureau." The room fell into an eerie silence. The judge blinked. "Excuse me." Daniel reached into his briefcase and pulled out a slim black folder. With 2 fingers, he slid it across the table toward the clerk. "Verify it," he said simply. "Right now." The clerk hesitated as every eye in the courtroom turned toward the black folder on her desk. Even the officers who'd been laughing moments earlier were now standing still, watching, blinking, unsure if this was some elaborate bluff. She opened the folder carefully. Inside was a sleek ID badge with a holographic federal seal, unmistakable, irrefutable. Below it, a photo of Daniel Cross. Name, Daniel J. Cross. Title, Director, Federal Bureau of Investigation. The judge leaned forward, his face paling. This can't be right." The clerk's voice trembled as she read aloud, "Appointed by presidential order. Clearance Level 8. Field and National Operations Oversight." The silence was crushing. One of the officers who had laughed earlier took a shaky step back. Another looked down at the floor, suddenly remembering every word he'd said about Daniel in the hallway before court. Daniel turned slightly, locking eyes with them. No smile. No anger. Just presence, total, commanding presence. "I wasn't arrested," he said quietly. "I volunteered to be here. I needed to see how this department operates when it thinks no one is watching." The judge swallowed hard. "Mr. Cross, Director Cross, why wasn't this disclosed earlier?" Daniel closed the folder and stood tall. "Because sometimes, the only way to expose the cracks, is to walk through them yourself." The room no longer resembled a courtroom. It felt more like a crime scene, not because of blood, but because of fear. Daniel turned to the judge, who was now visibly uncomfortable. "I filed 3 formal reports about misconduct tied to this courthouse," he said. "All were mysteriously delayed, ignored, or buried. So I came in person." He scanned the room slowly, landing his gaze on the prosecutor. Mr. Denton, Daniel said, you submitted false evidence to justify an arrest. That video from the traffic stop, the one where you claim I was combative, was cut short. The original, unedited footage shows the officers failing protocol, twice. Want me to play it? Denton's smugness dissolved. That footage was what we were given, Daniel cut him off. You had access to the full recording. You submitted the edited one anyway. That's tampering. The judge looked to the clerk. Get me the full video. Now. Meanwhile, one of the officers tried quietly slipping out the back. Deputy Lang, Daniel called out, not even turning. Sit down. The officer froze mid-step. He obeyed. Daniel placed both hands on the table. I wasn't here to prove who I am. I was here to prove who you are, all of you. He glanced toward the back of the room, where a man in a dark suit with an earpiece nodded and stepped forward. Special Agent Reeves, Daniel said, you can begin the audit. Gasps echoed through the room as Special Agent Reeves stepped forward, flanked by two more federal agents in dark suits. Each held a thick case file, and their faces were expressionless, cold and professional. We've been watching this courthouse for 6 months, Reeves announced to the room. Today was the final test. The judge's face drained of color. Test. Daniel nodded. We needed to see how deep the rot went. Turns out, it's worse than expected. He turned his attention back to the officers in the back. Multiple complaints of intimidation. Dismissed without investigation. Bodycam footage mysteriously lost, but we recovered backups. Denton stammered, you can't just barge in here and accuse us like this. I didn't barge in, Daniel replied sharply. This is my operation. And you're not being accused. You're being documented. Agent Reeves handed the judge a sealed document. This is a federal order to seize all internal records from this courthouse. Effective immediately. Phones, emails, personnel logs, everything. The bailiffs hesitated, unsure who to listen to. Daniel looked directly at them. You answer to the law. Not to corruption. Reluctantly, they stepped aside. One of the officers who had mocked Daniel earlier looked ready to speak, then sat down in silence. He finally understood, this wasn't a defendant they were dealing with. This was a man with the full weight of federal authority, and he'd just flipped their entire system upside down. Daniel adjusted his cufflinks and gave the judge a long, unreadable look. This isn't over, he said. This is just the beginning. The courtroom was no longer a place of judgment, it had become a scene of reckoning. Staff whispered nervously. Phones vibrated in pockets. The walls felt like they were closing in. Judge Marston leaned forward, voice tight. Director Cross, are you saying this entire court is under federal investigation? Daniel didn't blink. That's exactly what I'm saying. The judge shifted uncomfortably. And, me? Daniel walked slowly toward the bench. The room was silent, not a shuffle, not a cough. Only the sound of his shoes tapping against the polished floor. You've signed off on dozens of questionable warrants, Daniel said. Rubber-stamped every case brought by Denton. Dismissed legitimate concerns from public defenders without review. Your name shows up too often, Judge, on too many cases that violated too many rights. He paused. So yes. Especially you. Judge Marston looked like he wanted to speak, but words failed him. Agent Reeves spoke up, Judge, you're not being arrested, yet. But you are being placed under federal review. And effective immediately, you're recused from all active cases pending that investigation. The judge dropped his gavel like it was hot metal. Daniel turned back to the gallery. Every single person in this room thought today was just another routine hearing. You treated the process like a formality. You laughed, you mocked, and you thought no one was watching. He stepped forward, locking eyes with every officer in the room. But I was. And now Washington is too. As the agents began collecting files, laptops, and surveillance footage, the courtroom descended into barely contained chaos. The very people who once held control were now under a microscope, and they knew it. The prosecutor, Denton, tried one last desperate move. "I demand to speak to my superior at the Department of Justice." Daniel raised a hand calmly. "Already did. This operation was authorized directly through the Deputy Attorney General's office." "You've got no shield left, Denton." One of the officers whispered to another, "We're screwed, man, totally screwed." Agent Reeves opened one of the thick folders and began reading off names. Officer Lang. Lieutenant Brenner. Sergeant Mallory. "You're all being placed on administrative leave pending federal interviews." Brenner shot up from the back. "You can't suspend me without." "You're not suspended," Reeves cut in. "You're relieved. There's a difference. You'll be contacted within 24 hours by Internal Affairs and the Office of Civil Oversight. Do not return to duty until cleared." Daniel moved toward the door, the courtroom stunned behind him. But just before leaving, he turned one last time. This court's arrogance nearly turned it into a weapon against the very people it was supposed to protect. "That ends now." He nodded to the clerk, who looked equally shaken. "Keep that bench warm. A new judge will be here by the morning." Then Daniel walked out, followed by his agents, leaving behind a courtroom that would never operate the same again. Word spread faster than wildfire. By noon, local news stations were parked outside the courthouse. Reporters scrambled to piece together the story, but no one had the full picture, not yet. Just rumors, FBI sting, federal director disguised as defendant, entire courtroom under review. Meanwhile, inside City Hall, officials scrambled. Phones rang non-stop. Emails were flagged urgent. The mayor's chief of staff stormed into the office, red-faced. "You didn't tell me the FBI director was in town." The mayor, pale and sweating, whispered, "Because I didn't know." No one did. Back at FBI headquarters, Daniel Cross stood at the top-floor conference room, overlooking the skyline. He watched as the courthouse appeared on every local news station in real time. Agent Reeves entered with a tablet in hand. "It's all unfolding, sir." 2 officers already turned in their badges. 3 more are requesting legal counsel. Daniel nodded. "Let them. They're going to need it." Reeves hesitated. "And the judge?" "Already stripped of his caseload. The Oversight Committee begins interviews tonight." Daniel crossed his arms. For too long, people like them thought the badge gave them power instead of responsibility. Now they're learning that power is borrowed, and it can be taken away. He turned to Reeves. "Let's prep the press briefing. It's time the public knew why I really showed up in that courtroom." Because Daniel Cross hadn't just exposed a courtroom. He'd just sent a message to every corrupt system in the country. By that evening, the country was buzzing. Clips of Daniel standing in the courtroom, composed, deliberate, unshakable, were everywhere. News anchors couldn't stop repeating the same phrase. He didn't say a word, until he said, "I run the bureau." On social media, the hashtag Director Cross trended worldwide. Comment sections flooded with reactions ranging from disbelief to admiration. "That man walked into the lion's den and made the lions beg for mercy." Legend. "He didn't just expose corruption, he dismantled it in real time." Remind me never to underestimate a quiet man in a suit again. Meanwhile, at the Department of Justice, calls poured in from senators, governors, and even the White House. Everyone wanted answers. Everyone wanted the full report. And they were going to get it, every detail. Daniel's team worked overnight preparing the files for release. Every incident, every red flag, every overlooked complaint, no longer buried, no longer ignored. Agent Reeves entered Daniel's office the next morning with an update. "Sir, 2 more officers confessed. One of them admitted to falsifying arrest reports for years, said he knew the day would come when someone would walk in and flip the table. Daniel looked up. Good. Then let's keep flipping. He stood, buttoned his jacket, and picked up a leather folder labeled, Phase 2, Nationwide Sweep. Because what happened in that courtroom was just the pilot program. And Daniel Cross had no intention of stopping there. The next morning, in a secure federal briefing room in Washington, D.C., Daniel Cross stood at the head of a long conference table. Around him sat top brass from the DOJ, Internal Affairs, and Homeland Security. Everything that happened in that courtroom, Daniel began, was intentional. It wasn't just about exposing a courthouse. It was about lighting a flare, a warning shot to every institution that's lost its integrity. He dropped the leather folder onto the table. Inside, a list of 27 courthouses, 14 police departments, and 6 federal branches across the country. All flagged. All scheduled for internal review. This is Phase 2. We're going national. Murmurs broke out across the table. One official raised his hand. Director Cross, are you expecting pushback from state officials? Daniel didn't hesitate. I'm counting on it. That's how we'll know who's trying to hide. Back at the now infamous courthouse, things looked very different. The judge's chambers sat empty. Denton's nameplate had been taken down. The officers once stationed proudly near the benches now faced hearings of their own. A new interim judge took the bench. Cameras weren't allowed inside anymore, too much scrutiny, too many eyes. But everyone knew, things had changed for good. That afternoon, Daniel gave a live press conference on the steps of FBI headquarters. To every American who's ever felt like the system was rigged, unheard, or unseen, I see you, he said firmly. And I'm not just listening. I'm acting. Corruption isn't always loud. Sometimes, it hides behind routine. Behind tradition. Behind a badge, or a bench. But not anymore. Reporters shouted questions as he walked away, but Daniel didn't stop. Because this was never about one courtroom. It was about all of them. 3 weeks later, headlines across the country told the story plainly. FBI Director's surprise operation sparks national reckoning. Dozens of officials resign amid Cross-led federal probe. Daniel Cross, the man who turned the system on itself. The wave Daniel unleashed was unstoppable. Federal audits exposed long-hidden misconduct. Internal affairs swept through departments once thought untouchable. Prosecutors were disbarred. Judges were suspended. Chiefs stepped down. One by one, the pillars that had shielded corruption began to crumble. And Daniel? He remained 10 steps ahead. He met quietly with whistleblowers across the country, officers, clerks, junior attorneys, people who had been ignored for years. To them, Daniel wasn't just a federal director. He was their megaphone. Their battering ram. Their proof that the system could be held accountable by its own. At one town hall, a woman stood up and asked, "Why'd you do it that way? Disguised as a defendant?" Daniel smiled faintly. Because when you're treated like a problem, they stop pretending to play by the rules. And when that happens, the truth reveals itself faster than any badge ever could. Applause filled the room. Back in D.C., as he walked into the Bureau's main office, Agent Reeves joined him at the elevator. "You know this won't be the last time, right?" Reeves said. "There are still more cracks." Daniel nodded. "Then we keep walking through them." The elevator doors opened. He stepped inside, turned to face forward, and said just one thing before they closed: "Let's clean house."